Shalom Havrim, James Trim here, and today I want to talk to you about Galatians chapter 5, verse 2, where Paul says, Behold, I, Paul, say to you that if you be circumcised, Messiah shall profit you nothing. So the question is, what does this mean? Is there profit in circumcision? This is a passage that often gets quoted to us, and so today we'll explain what it really means. Before we get going, though, I need to ask you to please consider donating to support this work, this research, and these videos. As I am making this video, producing this video, we are $300 in the hole of being able to clear our bank account with bills hitting the account tonight. And as all of you know, what that means is that we would end up with return items and with a cascade of fees, and that sort of thing can quickly spiral out of control. We need your support today. On top of that, the rent will be due in 11 days. So we need you to step up and donate to support these videos, the blogs, all of the work that we're doing, providing free information online. So how do you do that? You can donate by clicking on the donate link in the video description, or by sending donations by PayPal to donations@wnae.org. We need your help today, very, very badly. All right. Today we're going to talk about, before I get going, also want to remind you to like these videos, subscribe to this channel, click that little bell so you'll get notifications when new videos are posted. Let us know what you think of our videos in the comments and participate in the discussions in the comments section. All of these things are things that the YouTube algorithm looks at to decide which videos to recommend to new viewers. And of course, we want to get recommended to new viewers. Also share these videos on your social media and with your friends on YouTube. This is YouTube, on Facebook and on Twitter and whatever other social media accounts you may have, and that helps bring in new viewers as well. We are over 3,000 subscribers now, but that'll help us get to, say, 3,500. Okay, so also you can follow along. Many of our videos, this one included, have PDF handouts that you can click on the handouts link in the video description, and you can follow along with some of the references that we have with the handouts. And you can do that again by clicking below on the handouts link. Okay, so let's start by comparing Galatians chapter 5 verse 2, and I'm just going to use the KJV language here for the comparison. Sometimes I use KJV language. I don't recommend using the KJV. It can be done safely by well-trained professionals. But I don't recommend using the KJV. It can be hazardous. Nonetheless, we're going to use it to compare these two passages, and that's so that people can see that we're not doing any special trick of the hand with the translation that we're using. So Galatians 5:2 says, Behold, I, Paul, say to you, that if you be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. Or to Hebraicize it, Behold, I, Paul, say to you, that if you're circumcised, Messiah shall profit you nothing. However, in Romans chapter 3, verses 1 through 2, we read, "What advantage then has the Jew, or hath the Jew? Or what profit is there of circumcision? Much every way, chiefly because that unto them were committed the oracles of God." That's Romans 3, 1 through 2. So which is it? Is there no profit in circumcision? Or is there profit much in every way in circumcision? When we compare Galatians 5:2 and Romans chapter 3, verses 1 through 2 on the surface, there seems to be an apparent contradiction between the two. Now, don't get me wrong, there is no contradiction once we understand these passages, but that is the point. There is something here that has to be understood, because on the surface, it looks like these passages, when we take them and isolate them from their context and look at them together, it looks like they seem to contradict one another. Okay, so our next handout is titled The 7 Rules of Hillel. And we're not going to go over all of Hillel's 7 rules here. We're only going to focus on one pertinent rule. But what are the 7 rules of Hillel? The 7 rules of Hillel were compiled by Hillel the Great around somewhere between 60 and 20 CE, when Yeshua was 60 BCE and 20 CE. Probably during the time that Yeshua was a child, certainly when he was a youth. Hillel and Shammai were 2 competitive leading figures in Judaism during the days of Yeshua's youth, and Hillel was known for teaching the spirit of the law, while Shammai was known for teaching the letter of the law. And Yeshua's teaching largely followed that most closely of the school of Hillel. There is some exceptions. For example, Yeshua followed Shammai on the issue of divorce in Matthew chapter 19, verse 9. Okay, Yeshua's famous golden rule, for example, whatever you would that men should do to you, do you even to them, for this is the Torah and the prophets, is very similar to Hillel's famous statement, what is hateful to yourself, do not do to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah. So Yeshua says that in Matthew 7:12, and Hillel says his version earlier in Yeshua's youth in Shabbat 31a. Also appears in the book of Tobit, the apocryphal book of Tobit, even before Hillel. So upon Hillel's death, the mantle of the school of Hillel was passed to his son Simeon, or Shimon, and upon Shimon's death, the mantle passed to the school of Hillel, passed to Gamaliel, and Gamaliel spoke in defense of the early Nazarenes in Acts chapter 5, verses 34 through 39, and he was the teacher of Paul in Acts 22:3. In 2 Timothy 2:15, Paul tells us to speaks of, quote, rightly dividing the word of truth. What did he mean? Was he saying that he was saying that there was a right and a wrong way to interpret the scriptures, and we can see consistently, maybe that's another video to do in the future, that Paul made use of the 7 rules of Hillel. So I think that there's a good argument to be made that, at least in part, when Paul talks about rightly dividing the word of truth, that he speaks of the 7 rules of Hillel. Certainly he would have been taught them by Gamaliel, and he knew them well, and we see him regularly using them. So now I want to turn to the next handout, the 6th rule of Hillel. The 6th rule of Hillel says that analogy made from another passage. Basically, this rule means that if you have 2 passages that seem to conflict until they may seem to conflict until they're compared with a 3rd passage that resolves the apparent conflict. So an example of this, Leviticus chapter 1 verse 1 says, out of the tent of meeting. Exodus 25:2 says, from above the ark of the covenant between the cherubim. They seem to disagree until we examine Numbers 7:89, where we learn that Moshe entered the tent of meeting to hear Yahweh speaking from between the cherubim. A good example is found in the book of Romans, a good example of Paul using this. Paul quotes Habakkuk 2:4 and Romans 1:17, the just shall live by faith. And then in Romans 3:10, he quotes Psalm 14, 1 through 3, in Psalm 53, 1 through 3, there is none righteous, not one. And also Ecclesiastes 7:20. And he does the same here. Elohim will render to each one according to his deeds. In Romans 2:6, he's quoting Psalms 62:12 and Proverbs 24:12. And he says, blessed are those whose lawless deeds are forgiven, whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man whom Yahweh shall not impute, in Romans chapter 4, verses 7 through 8. And he's quoting Psalms 32 through 12. So in both of these sets of passages, he shows two different sets of at least two passages each, in which there appears to be a conflict on the surface between those passages that he's quoting from the Tanakh. Then he resolves the apparent conflict by citing Genesis 15:6 in Romans 4:3, verses 3 and 22, that Abraham believed Elohim and it was accounted to him for righteousness. So he resolves this apparent conflict by showing that under certain circumstances, belief, faith, or trust, same word in Hebrew, emunah, can act as a substitute for righteousness or being just, which is also the same word in Hebrew, tzaddik. Okay, tzadikah. Okay, so turning to now we have a couple of examples, one in Paul's usage and one in the Torah, where we just look at the Torah, of this rule of Hillel, this sixth rule of Hillel. So this sixth rule of Hillel, rightly dividing the word of truth, this sixth rule of Hillel is going to help us to resolve the apparent conflict between Galatians 5:2 and Romans 3:1 through 2, as to whether there is profit in circumcision, as Romans 3:1 through 2 says, much in every way. Well, what profit is there of circumcision? Much every way. And Galatians 5:2 says that if you be circumcised, Messiah shall profit you nothing. What's the how do we resolve this conflict? We can also, by the way, use context to resolve the conflict, because we're going to be using a third passage, but the third passage is from the context of what Paul is actually saying in Galatians chapter 5, verse 2. So one of the basic questions that we have to ask ourselves in attempting to understand the meaning of a passage is, who is speaking and who is being spoken to? And we know Paul is the speaker. That's easy. It's the book of Galatians. Paul wrote it. But who is being spoken to? Who is he addressing? In other words, in Galatians 5:2, behold, I, Paul, say to you that if you be circumcised, Messiah shall profit you nothing. Who is you in Galatians chapter 5, verse 2? Is it the Galatians as general? Is it all mankind? Is it Gentiles? We don't know. Well, we do know. If we rightly divide the word of truth and apply the sixth rule of Hillel and the rule of context as well, which is another one of Hillel's rules, is it the Is it the modern reader of Galatians? Is it Christians? I don't know. Well, we'll find out. The answer to all these questions is no, no, no. It's none of those groups. If we look up just a little bit in Paul's letter, we will see who you is. See, Galatians 5:2 is the summary of an argument that he initiates and begins in Galatians chapter 4, verse 21. Verse 21, he says, chapter 4, verse 21, tell me, you that desire to be under the law, what do you hear the law? Or in other words, tell me, you that desire to be under the law, do you not hear the Torah? So, here it's very important to understand what under the law means. And we did a whole video on that recently, 2 or 3 videos back. And I'll put a link to that in the video description, the Under the Law video. What's important to know here is that under the law, to summarize that video, it was a false theology that was never true. It's not referring to the obsolete Old Testament system. Under the law, we've always been under grace. We've never been under the law. Under the law was a false teaching that was held by the Essenes, the Qumran community, that man was positionally under the law. He was less important than the Torah. And the Pharisaic position and Paul's position was that man was more important than the Torah, that the Torah was created for the benefit of man, not vice versa. So whereas the Essenes believed that if a man fell into a pit on the Shabbat or fell into a cistern, a cistern, it was better to let him drown than to use a tool to rescue him on the Shabbat, because the Shabbat was more important than he was. And the Pharisaic position and Yeshua's position both were that no, man is more important than the Torah. The Torah was given to man for the benefit of man. And therefore, the Torah is under man. Man is not under the Torah. And the idea that man was under the Torah was a false system of salvation and a false theology that was never true, that was held by Paul's opponents in the book of Galatians. In fact, you may also want to go back and watch our video about the phrase works of the law. You may also go back to a video series we did a few years ago going through the entire book of Galatians, in which we explained all of this also in detail. So, now that we know that you is defined in chapter 4, verse 21 as you that desire to be under the law, Galatians 5:2 should be understood to mean, behold, I, Paul, say to you that desire to be under the law, that if you be circumcised, Messiah shall profit you nothing. So Paul is telling these people who are desiring to enter into a false system of salvation and a false ideology, a false theology that was never true. In other words, this group of people that are desiring to apostatize and seek a false system of salvation, that their circumcision will profit them nothing, following the context of Galatians 5:1 and understanding who you is. To draw a good parallel, imagine a Baptist preacher. And the Baptist preacher is addressing not in front of him, but just in general, addressing a group that he considers apostates, say the Jehovah's Witnesses. And he says, your baptism will profit you nothing. Now, that doesn't mean that the Baptist opposes baptism or thinks that there's no profit in baptism. He only means that baptism is of no profit to apostates. So this is what Paul is saying in Galatians chapter 4, verses 22 through 31, he's saying that the Torah is freedom, that the under the law teaching is bondage, and that it's a false teaching and it's bondage, and that a person who wants to enter into that bondage, who's desiring to enter into that bondage, who is apostatizing, their circumcision won't benefit them. It's of no profit to them. However, in Romans chapter 3, verses 1 through 2, Paul is not addressing apostates. In Romans 3, 1 through 2, he says, what advantage has the Jew, and what profit is there in circumcision? Much every way, chiefly because that unto them were committed the oracles of God. So, to believers, there is great profit in circumcision. But to apostates, there is no profit in circumcision. And that's all that Paul is saying in Galatians chapter 5, verse 2. All right, one more time, I want to encourage you. These are unique studies. This is unique material. Where do you find material like this on a regular basis? Every 2 or 3 days, we try and put out a new video. And we need to ask you to please donate to support this work. The coffers are empty and, in fact, in the negative by $300 today. We need you guys to step up and support this work with your donations, and you can do that by clicking on the donate link in the video description or sending donations by PayPal to donations@wnae.org. Also, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to these videos, to this channel, click that little bell icon so that you'll get notifications of new videos when they come out. Let us know what you think of these videos in the comments section. Participate in the comments, discussions, and of course, share these videos on your social media accounts, Facebook, Twitter, etc., with your friends. Until next time, everybody, shalom.